Ever. There we go.
Go right for it.
All right.
Well, I said, I think that those settings that you do it could be put into the invitation, like when you schedule the thing. I think you could probably throw those switches beforehand and save it.
No.
And that way you can probably just like say, okay, make me a new one based on this template.
Sounds good.
You don't have to do the discovery every time.
Nope, we're gonna keep doing it. just to piss him off. He's gonna get so frustrated.
Thanks for the advice.
Thanks.
We're not gonna take it.
I've forgotten it already.
Trust me. When confronted with the easy way or the hard way, Kate will always opt for the hard way.
Kate is the Kool-aid Man of challenges, just bursting through walls. And that's how you enter our Zoom chats all the time. You're like, hey!
Thank you.
But yeah, thanks, Bert. So welcome everybody to Table for Deuce, episode 4. I am here with Kate Hanson Foster. I am always just gonna have to slow down whenever I do that. With Kate Hanson Foster, author of Crow Funeral and Midriff. And Kate, I have nothing of roastiness to say currently, sadly. I've got nothing. I've blanked. Here's Kate.
Okay, well, let me read yours. Michael Schmeltzer is the author of Empire of Surrender and Bloodsong. When he isn't writing, he spends most of his time on his OnlyFans eating saltless saltines in threadbare underwear. Welcome. Welcome,
so
Michael.
Close to true.
It's been a busy week.
Yeah, it has been.
And
it's been
voting and midterms and
that's right.
Democracy.
That's right.
And all that. So
that's right. Democracy was on the line.
Want to tell you something that happened to me this week?
Yes.
So you know that I got COVID back in May, and and it hit me pretty hard. I was really sick, and it's been taking me forever to get back. It just fell out of a good workout routine. So I was like, oh, I can't, because I'm putting on weight. I'm gotta get back in shape. So Monday, day 1, going down, and we have a little workout room in the basement that it's just a little room we've converted. It's got a treadmill, weights, and we put some flooring down, workout gym type flooring and all that. I get going, and I'm trying to get myself, I can feel that I'm not at my best, but whatever. The first thing on the workout thing that I was doing was jump squats, and I'm I'm going for it, beast mode, so I'm jumping and I'm squatting and I'm jumping and I'm squatting, and then next thing I see in the corner of my eye, holy Hosanna in the highest, a snake on the ground. It was just looking at me, just coming out from the underworld, all legless and evil. I scream. I immediately take a picture of it and send it to Bert, who's on his way to work. So he's not even around. So I have to deal with this all alone. It's me and the snake, except then Arlo, my dog, walks in. Then Hippie, the cat, walks in. And then Booter walks in. And I'm like, get away from the snake. So I shut the door. And then I go and I find, I go try to find some kind of mechanism to capture it, and I find eventually a shoebox, which is still sitting outside, by the way. I won't bring that shoebox back into the house, because that is where the serpent was, and I set it free in the yard, and I'm never working out ever again.
I like that.
How is that not an omen though? It was the way he just slithered out, watching me work out, where am I, and all this stuff. And it was I don't feel like you feel as horrified as I was.
Well, like, so my eldest had a snake, so I'm a little bit more accustomed to it, though it did escape, so it could very well be in the house somewhere. We have no idea.
I had turned my Apple Watch on, and my Apple Watch was like still clocking me at like 175 beats per minute. Like, as I'm just trying to find like a box to put the thing in, and I'm like, oh my God, it was an ordeal. And anyway, so
Oh, I don't have anything as exciting as that, or not as scary. So I got to host. So I am part of a program. I'm one of the curators, or I am the curator for the Jack Straw writing program here in Seattle. So I got to do our final event at the Seattle Public Library and host my writers and introduce them. And it was a magical time. These writers are so talented, and I will probably get a few on the show at some point because I just want to be able to talk to them some more. And one of my authors, Erin Langner, just had a book come out, Souvenirs from Paradise, out from Zone 3. I don't understand how my hologram works. Look at that.
yeah.
But
Okay, yeah.
Souvenirs from Paradise, Erin Langner, out from Zone 3 Press, book of personal essays, based in like Vegas. There's a lot of Vegas talk, but it's about more than Vegas. It's about loss. It's about like the idea of these souvenirs or takeaways or these moments in time, whatever, what have you. But it's good. I just read the first one, and I've been a fan of her work for a while, so I was excited to be able to work with her throughout this year. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep plugging my writers because they're the best. Speaking of writers, I'm gonna plug Paige Lewis.
Yep.
Should we jump right in?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time reading this poem this week.
I probably spent less than you, as is going to be the pattern for the toaster roast that we do. It's going to be you spending so much time rereading.
I did. I probably read it like 10 times, but yeah.
Let's try it. Okay, this is from the book Space Struck out of Saraband Books, published in 2019 by Paige Lewis. And since the title goes right into the poem, I'm just going to do it that way. The moment I saw a pelican devour, a seagull, wings swallowing wings, I learned that a miracle is anything that God forgot to forbid. So when you tell me that saints are splintered into bone bits smaller than the freckles on your wrist, and that each speck is sold to the rich, I know to marvel at this, and not the fact that these same saints are still wholly intact and fresh-faced in their plexiglass tomb displays. We wholly our own fragments when we can. Trepanation patients wear their skull spirals as amulets. Mothers frame the dried foreskin of their firstborn, and I've seen you swirl my name on your tongue like a thirst pebble. Still, I try to hold on to nothing for fear of being crushed by what can be taken, because sometimes not even our mouths belong to us. Listen, in the early 1920s, women were paid to paint radium onto watch dials so that men wouldn't have to ask the time in dark alleys. They were told it was safe, told to lick their brushes into sharp points. These women painted their nails, their faces, and judged whose skin shone brightest. They coated their teeth so their boyfriends could see their bites with the lights turned down. The miracle here is not that these women swallowed light. It's that when their skin dissolved and their jaws fell off, the Radium Corporation claimed that they all died from syphilis. It's that you're telling me about the dull slivers of dead saints while these women are glowing beneath our feet. That was The Moment I Saw a Pelican Devour by Paige Lewis.
Can I just ask, are you reading that from a different source? Because there was a couple of differences in what you read than what I have. I have the last line that it's that you're more interested in telling me about the dull slivers of dead saints while these women's are glowing.
Oh, that's interesting. Is that from the Sixth Finch?
Yeah,
that's from the website itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm reading it from the actual book. So there must have been an edit between those two versions.
That's an interesting change in that last line. But anyways,
oh, that is. We should talk about that too. That is very fascinating though. I like that.
Because
I like the
that kind
change.
of changes my well, I have lots of thoughts about this, but I think I understand that cut based on your reading of it. But anyways, but yeah, I want to hear what you think about this.
So I like the poem a lot. So there's something about, like, I don't know if it's exactly what I would call like stream of consciousness per se, but there is kind of this way where you can almost see the brain of the poet working. It kind of just flows very well. And like I said, I'm always obsessed with the musicality of language. And so there's a lot of musical things about the poem that really work for me, that keep me going from stanza to stanza. And I'm not sure, it wasn't this way in the Sixth Finch, but the stanzas and the lines itself are kind of staggered. So you have a tercet that's kind of staggered and then goes to the next one and staggered. And so there's this kind of beautiful flowing quality on the page itself. And like I said, the music itself and the line breaks, the way they go from one line to the next without having a full end stop, is, once again, it kind of pulls you forward. There's a momentum to it that keeps me going. There's a lot of lines that just strike me as something like really fascinating and interesting. The line right up front, "A miracle is anything that God forgot to forbid." It's always been kind of mysterious and interesting to me. I like the line, "Wings swallowing wings." There's something so kind of unnatural about that to me. And not that this has anything to do with the poem, but there is a documentary I saw, like a nature documentary, where a catfish ate a pigeon. And I think that was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, you're a creature of the sea. Why are you eating a creature of the air? Like, you two shouldn't even meet. Like, what is happening here? Like, the horrifying can be miraculous too. So I like this notion that there are things that have been forgotten that are also miracles, but in a terrible way. And that kind of brings me to the end of the poem as well, where you have these glowing bones and these, the horrifying image of skin dissolving and the women's jaws falling off. And it's like, there's these things that are happening. And this feels genuinely strange and quirky and interesting. Like, it's the viewpoint of the narrator that is focused on these very dark and very interesting and very strange things. And it's very kind of macabre at times, but it's something that I feel in the writing is so genuine and so interesting. And I just feel like there's a lot of people that have tried that have failed, and it feels very successful in this poem.
I mean, I agree with you that the line that definitely holds the most attention for me is that line, "A miracle is anything God forgot to forbid." And it's almost as if the speaker is really just going right ahead and redefining their concept of what a miracle is, because we all know the classic definition of miracles is something sort of spiritual and something that is created by God or because of God, and that it's also very unnatural, which it makes it such a shocking thing to experience. And so I keep reading that line and trying to understand it. Like, I've read it over and over, trying to understand what Lewis means by writing that. If God forgot to forbid something, which to me seems something, like you said, like macabre or like just almost evil and uncomfortable, or sin, these things, like all these other images of things that happen in the second part of the poem. Why make that, I haven't quite come around to understand the line of it being a miracle, and just the whole concept of miracles in itself. This image of the, I know you said you like the wings swallowing wings, and that to me felt like an easy line, even though it sings. It sings, but I think based on the rest of the poem, I think I would have been more taken by like mouth swallowing mouth, or
Mm.
something a little less obvious. You know, a pelican eating a seagull is, even though if you were to witness it, which I never have, thank God, but from what I've learned, you know, is
Mhm.
an actual, you know, it's a pretty natural occurrence, you know, that it's not an unnatural event in the way that we normally perceive or our conceptual image of miracles to be. You know, I wouldn't say it's turned me off the poem. It's just kind of made me, it makes me want to understand. They have my attention. I'll say that. One of the things I really loved was the line, "We wholly are fragments," and that was another turn of phrase that that caught my attention, because it's, you know, using wholly as a verb, like, you know, that it's we wholly are, instead of like we make wholly our fragments, which again would have been kind of an easier line. And this one is more of a kind of just a little bit of a different spin on it. Some of the stuff I had a little bit of, I struggled with, just tense wise, I guess, you know, and the generalization of a lot of the listing of things that kind of to back up this concept of just like humans needing to make relics out of things. You know, the trepanation, or the act of trepanation, as far as I understand, isn't really like a thing anymore. So to say, you know, like trepanation patients wear their skull spirals as amulets, I don't see, that's not like a believable line to me as something that is happening like today. We get into the whole second half of the poem and we start talking about, the speaker starts to talk about this, you know, whole ordeal from the 1920s. You know, there was no problem to say that this particular event that happened in the 1920s and stuff. And so anyways, it felt a lot like, you know, and also mothers, you know, framing dried foreskin was a very general statement as well, that I truly had to go to Google to see if that was a thing. Because it's like, okay, well, is that, you know, is that a particular religion that does that? I couldn't find anything. It didn't seem like a common practice that I was aware of. I found myself doing not research per so much, but just trying to understand, looking for proof of these statements.
And I also would love to see your search history. It must be the most outrageous thing ever.
New mothers be like, oh, well, then it was like dried foreskin, that got me all over the place. And then
like, hey Alexa,
who don't want to know?
How do I dry foreskin?
And frame it on the wall. It's a little bit, I don't want to say like aggressive, but almost like argumentative, especially with this unidentified you that the speaker is addressing several times. Like at first I thought, when it was, you know, that line, like, so when you tell me that saints are splintered into bone bits smaller than the freckles on your wrist, you know, I kind of first read it as a more universal you. Then when you get to the part where it's like, listen, it starts to feel a little bit more argumentative to me, like that there is an actual back and forth happening between the speaker and this you person, that feels defensive, I guess, in a way. And there's the line about the you know, you swirl my name in your mouth, that made it into your version, right? The
thirst pebble.
The thirst pebble, which I love that image. But it made me wonder, who is this you? You know, and I started to think, well, that sounds like a lover, you know, so this sounds like a poem between like the speaker and a lover, or a speaker and an admirer, or what. And so there was just a lot of questions that came up.
So thinking about the you, I do get that sense of kind of I don't maybe argumentative is the right word, I'm not quite sure, but there is definitely a response there, it seems, for sure. I think there's something really interesting that kind of happens where it's like, when I initially read it a long time ago, I thought it would be a little more like tender in a way. And then the more I kind of stayed with it, it wasn't necessarily a tender poem or what I would consider a tender poem. It was definitely one that had a certain kind of dynamics going into it that I would say is more argumentative, more defensive or whatnot. I think it is really interesting. The version that you read at Sixth Finch, I think would support that idea more. I think there's something,
Yeah.
I think the line that you said was, it's that you're more interested in telling me rather than it's that you're telling me about. I think that the interested part definitely puts more tension between the two.
Yeah,
I would say.
and so that's why I said I think it's a really it's probably a better version. Like that cut was probably a smarter cut to make because it does so you're more interested, and that really doesn't carry through the poem. There's no proof of or suggestion that there is this you that exists in this poem that is showing that they're more interested in this. It is interesting that part where we start to go into the Radium Corporation and listen, because my feelings about the word listen.
Yeah, we've had talks about that.
That word is used a lot as a poetic device. It is obviously used as this sort of very delicate, in most ways, a very delicate pivot. But I don't feel that here. This here feels listen. Like you are not getting it. Yeah, I got really preoccupied with that tension and the you and who the you is and why and whether or not the way it keeps coming back to this kind of person in the poem, and it caused more questions for me than answers, I guess.
So the line, let's take wings swallowing wings, for instance. There's this technique called a synecdoche, which is where you have a part of something that represents the whole. So instead of saying car, you'd say, oh, check out my wheels, that kind of thing. So wings being that. And I almost think the you acts as kind of a synecdoche in a way of a larger kind of critique of a certain kind of dynamic. And so like when you have the you, it says, so when you tell me that saints are splintered into bone bits smaller than the freckles on your wrist, you have that idea of the you's wrist. And then there's the women painting the radium on the watch dials so that the men wouldn't have to ask for time in the dark alleys. That's also another kind of wrist. Like the men's wrists are, and their time is more important than the literal lives of these women. And I think there's really something interesting that kind of happens there between the you that seems to almost be more self-focused and uses the speaker's name like a thirst pebble. So there's a lot of this kind of taking that is happening from one side, and a lot of giving or being taken from that's happening on the other. I think the you is, I don't want to assume too much and say it's a person or it's about a real relationship or anything like that, but I do think there is a relationship dynamic there that is being spoken about and spoken to in a larger way.
I mean, the tension is palpable to me, that there's a point that's trying to be made. Like I can feel the speaker's aggravation. But I have to say, I also kind of wanted, I have mixed feelings about when people use the first line of a poem as a title. Feels a little like cop out, because it couldn't, it's like when you have so much happening in a poem, sometimes it is really hard to find the right title. And so, but if you are to put I don't put that much weight on titles, but some people do. And if you were to put a lot of weight on a title, does the poem hold up to that particular image? It's almost bizarre to have this poem begin with such a grotesque, disturbing image, and then never really come back to it again. Most of this poem really is about, it's a whole second half of the poem is entirely about this event that happened in the 1920s with the Radium Corporation and the women, ingesting radium and getting sick and dying. It feels like this is what the poem is about. As you get through, it's like, this to me is what the poem is about. It's not about dry foreskin. There is this whole idea of like the saints and their, being, to think that, rich people can just buy a speck of a saint, and there's something grotesque in that as well. And I guess I keep coming back to that one line of, what is considered a miracle, and if it's whatever God forgot to forbid. I guess, I don't know. I'm struggling, Michael. I'm struggling.
No, I can definitely see your point. The title is almost like clickbait in a way. Because it's definitely,
yeah. And it's not that everything needs that hook back, that it's, but the fact that, it is such a crazy image, and yet not really crazy at all, because it does happen. It's not something like, like the moment I saw, my cat eat my dog, or like something, completely outlandish. It sounds crazy, but it really isn't that crazy of an occurrence to happen. And so if you're going to do this deep dive in redefining the concept of miracles, I'm just wondering if the speaker delivers here.
For me, I think it does deliver. I think there is something about, so if we're going to get theological, let's say, God is good, let's say, and God is all good, and there's no evil found within God, et cetera, then the idea that God forgot to forbid something would maybe make that miracle inherently evil, perhaps. So I think the idea that the pelican devouring a seagull, or this corporation that is lying about, the dangers of all this stuff, I think all of these things could be considered things that would be miraculous in the sense that they are evil acts that are being committed that weren't forbidden. In a way, you could talk about the ethics of corporations, or the morals and ethics and values of certain time periods or society roles or whatever. So I think in that sense, there is like a big critique of a certain kind of practice. I do think it doesn't necessarily hold on to that idea of, let's say, religion. It kind of transitions from that, what God forgot to forbid, to the saints, and then it does pull away from that a little bit, but it kind of goes back to it at the end there with you're telling me about the dull slivers of dead saints while those women are glowing beneath our feet. So I think there is something that is being divided between this kind of these corporations or patriarchy or men, and the damage that it is causing not men, basically, where if something is, if God forgot to forbid it, it's like you have God and then you have something that's forgotten. And I feel like that parallel is you have men and corporations and then what is forgotten. And I think that is kind of how it plays out, at least in my mind. But I do think it does, pays off for me. It does kind of tie it back in with the saints. And there is a very clear, I think, kind of point being made where you have these dull slivers of dead saints and then you have these women glowing. And I think that is a pretty solid, and I don't want to say blunt statement, but it is a very, very clear image to me.
The image is nice, but it's not believable in terms of what would be considered. I guess you'd say if that was true, that would seem like a miracle by my understanding of the word miracle. Like, wow, can't believe after 100 years that their bones are still glowing underground. It's almost like presenting this this concept of the speaker's concept of what this new redefined miracle concept thing is as like a thesis statement, that I had this epiphany when I saw this bird eat this bird, that this is how this is what a miracle is. And so, I'm not trying to make this like, that we're in like a science lab or whatever, and you have to prove your hypothesis here. But like, I don't know if I got to that point of saying, okay, yeah, a miracle is, yes, that, that's when I understand how that you came to that realization that, a miracle is something God forgot to forbid.
It's a complex line. I think it's a really interesting line. I think and I'm not like a theologian by any means. I think the idea of a miracle is generally something that there is a rule for that gets broken, that won't get broken again, essentially, or just like this very one-time unique experience. And that's the rarity of it makes it a miracle, not something so commonplace. So I think there's a lot that could be extrapolated just from that one line, I think.
Relics are such a huge part of spirituality and and your beliefs, and so I do like this steering away from, like, you're telling me about these bone fragments of saints being sold to the rich, when there are these bones of these women that suffered this horrible event, and that is something that should be cherished.
And just really quick, I didn't get to mention it earlier, but you mentioned a line, "We wholly our own fragments," and it's harder to, I'm sure if the reader's actually reading the poem, they can see kind of this word play that occurs. You have the same saints are still wholly intact, WHOLLY. Then you have "we wholly our own fragments," HOLY. You have these kind of beautiful, playful, what is it, homophones? Is that the word for it? I've forgotten my basic English words here, but you have these really interesting kind of puns and playfulness that is throughout the poem, I think, as well. So that's another thing that I do enjoy about this, is that despite the kind of like tragedy of the poem in a lot of ways, there is still a sense of wordplay and play that I think a lot of good poems, even elegies, have that sense of play within the word structure or the poems itself that I think is throughout this one. So
it's an unusual poem. I can't really think of any poem that I have read recently that is anything like it. It's and so it's I don't regret reading it. There's a lot. There is a lot packed in. There's this thing where I think poets do a lot, where you feel you have to gain momentum in your presentation of the poem, and so you're kind of in list mode of doing whatever it takes to sort of generate that momentum of like, this is what I'm trying to tell you, and bam bam bam, like this image, this image, this image, and they they read well, they're interesting lines, and they do have there's nothing clunky about the way this poem flows, just but when I take apart some of these lines and start thinking about more of what they mean or how they fit, I don't know, I get a little lost in it all.
I could definitely see that. Yeah, I think I think poets and just I think human psychology in general, we tend towards threes. I think that's a easy pattern. There's easy, like when you do comedy or whatnot, there's that kind of pattern of three and things like that. So I do think that line in particular too, when it starts off with "we wholly our own fragments," and there's kind of three different examples there that fall into it. And I can, like you said, there is that switch from holding our own fragments to the mother's holding something else's fragment. And it is a switch. I could definitely see that. And I have no idea about that either. I have no idea if that's a older custom, if that's a current custom in some cultures. My foreskin knowledge is so little.
If you're gonna go for these images, maybe not demand so much from the reader to sort of seek out these answers, which and that is ultimately, I think, what I felt was happening. There was just a lot put on me as the reader to figure out how this all fit together.
I think we're ready. I think we're ready to do this. All right. So since it was my poem I chose, I will go first. I give the entire book and this poem as well a toast. Like, if you haven't had a chance to read Space Struck, it is a very fascinating book. It is filled with lines that are interesting and different, and they kind of make you pause and look at the world a little bit differently. They do the thing where they have the poem title run into the first line of the poem, which is also interesting when it works well. This one, for instance, because the color is half the taste, it's a shame to eat blackberries in the dark. Like, that's a great title that runs into that nice first line. And there are always these things that really make me think. But back to the poem, toast. Let's see.
Well, I will say, just even from what, having read this, I enjoyed reading it for the worldly aspect of it. I learned some things. I liked a lot of the lines, and I'm very interested in reading the book, so it's on my list. You know, I do love poems like this that make you think outwardly, and kind of the historical references are always really interesting. But at the end of the day, I will say, you know, I felt like when a poem, if it does demand too much from the reader, not that I need my poem served to me on a platter, you know, all with a nice little bow on top, but I did feel like this one demanded just a little bit too much, that I got more caught up in the references and the sort of lack of balance, I guess, in content, where it seemed very heavy on the radium, and maybe not heavy enough on the image of the birds. You know, there's so much that I at the end of the day, I the barometer is hard, but I'm leaning rose. Leaning rose on this.
All right, we are split again.
I'm sorry.
That's right. We have to make hard choices. That's the whole point, is to distill all these interesting ideas and conversations into the most generic of opinions. The toast or roast. I love it though. I love it. So
Yeah.
dear sweet 12 subscribers and whoever else is out there, if you have an opinion about this poem by Paige Lewis, let us know at tableforDeuce@gmail.com, or leave a comment on the video, leave a comment on our Facebook page, send us, you know, a letter in the mail, insult us via postcard, whatever you feel like doing. Let us know what you
We don't have
think.
an address.
We don't have anything. That's right. I don't care about your
post your address for the reader.
Sweet.
The watchers and the listeners.
Send your framed dry foreskins to Michael Schmeltzer. Like, I have to admit, the things you brought up that were questionable things about the poem, they were things I hadn't thought about that do make me think. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. There is an allure to that poem that gets me, but I can see how it can be more of a, I don't want to say trick, but I get swept up a lot in just the sheer uniqueness of that voice in the poem, that I will be biased against, like, towards the flaws. I will ignore the flaws because that voice is so fascinating to me. That kind of mystery of that voice and these images and these ideas are so fascinating to me that I don't necessarily stop to think, well, why are they even there?
We were talking the other day, and you brought up a really good point, I think, which is that if you go too deep into a poem and you start getting a little too researchy or dissect too much, you know, the poem might start to lose its heartbeat that you should have, you know, that just it exists on its own, where you can kind of just follow along, and you don't want to take the heart out of it by overthinking everything.
We could talk about what is the role of a poem, like how much can it ask of the reader before it becomes inaccessible, and that's a really fascinating thing. You have the idea of like mystery of a poem versus obscurity. you don't want a poem to be obscure because it just completely shuts out the reader. And so if your scale kind of falls on that, okay, you're having me tip a little bit too far into these kind of obscure images or ideas or concepts or historical facts, versus like if there isn't that initial grasp when you read a poem that really pulls you in, that makes you want to do more research rather than I need to research to understand it, versus like I want to do more research because I love the poem. I mean, there's that split. So I can see like it's such an interesting balancing act for a poem to be able to hold that line. And there are definitely some poems I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's like technically great, but you're not wooing me enough to do research into what all these things mean or how they connect. It isn't enough for me. So, but this one I do. I am wooed. We have a very exciting episode coming up. Our very first guest of all time, Clint Margrave, who is the author of the new book Visitor, which just came out from was it New York Quarterly Press, I believe.
Yep.
And Clint is the author of the novel Lying Bastard and 2 previous books of poetry as well. But we're going to talk to Clint. He suggested a poem for us to toast or roast, which please join us. The poem is Simply Lit by Melina Morling. It's from the book Astoria out of University of Pittsburgh Press, out since like 2006. But yeah, Simply Lit by Melina Morling. We're gonna toast or roast that with Clint. He's gonna share his opinions. We're gonna mock him. And then he might read a poem or 2 from his new book, and we'll ask him some deep, thought-provoking questions, which is totally our brand. And it's not gonna be anything stupid at all.
Yeah. I can't wait to ask him about this.
Look at that blank back cover.
Look at that.
Look at that. I heard a rumor he asked hundreds of writers to blurb him, and they all refused. They all said no. Let's see.
He chose not to have blurbs, and I can't wait to talk about that.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
well, thank you everybody for being here.
Yep. Like and subscribe. Follow us on the Twitter if you're still on Twitter.
That's right.
We're on Facebook as well. And I don't know, might find our way onto other channels. We'll see how much social media devolves as we continue on. All right. Well, another good show. Till next time. Right?
Till next time, everybody. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you,
Bye.
Michael. See you later. It's a brain pickle to me. Maybe I'm just not smart enough. I'm just a dummy who doesn't understand.
Subscribe to my OnlyFans.
I've seen you on OnlyFans twisting that saltine like a thirsty couple.
Love you, Bert.